WNYC-TV presents About the Arts with Barbara Lee Diamonstein.
Hi, I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our guest is Schuyler Chapin, who has spent a life in musical management, culminating in his appointment as general manager of the Metropolitan Opera. He's just written a lively and entertaining book, Musical Chairs, A Life in the Arts. It chronicles those experiences, good and bad. He is at present Dean of the School of Arts of Columbia University and a newly appointed advisor to Sarah Caldwell's Opera Company of Boston. It's a very special pleasure to welcome you here, Schuyler.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm delighted to be here. Also delighted you like the book.
I do indeed, but more about that. Let's start with that part of your career that might be described as one of our time's more controversial fields, and that is arts management.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that point when it reached what might be called the highest low point possible. After 3 turbulent years for the Metropolitan Opera, a deficit-ridden company, you were its general manager, and your post was, as you describe it, very faithfully, as declared obsolete. What exactly does that mean?
Well,
and how did that come about?
Well, I think it came about for a lot of reasons. You must remember that the Metropolitan, as many other organizations, in the early 70s began to face into financial problems that had, in the case of the Met, had been predicted, but there is quite a difference between a prediction of something and it's actually bubbling to the surface. It's not dissimilar to the problems, for example, that we're having now with the energy crisis. I mean, you know, people are telling us that there's an energy crisis. The Congress doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. The President exhorts us about it, but we in this country seem to wait until a crisis is upon us. And the Metropolitan financial problem began building in 1966, really, when they moved into the new beautiful house at Lincoln Center. And in 1968, the then director of finances for the Met laid out a 10-year projection which showed that by 1978, unless the Met did something in the way of capital funding or finding new sources of revenue, that the company would be pretty much bankrupt. When I came into the post of general manager, of course, I was also someone who was not the choice of the Board of Trustees. That honor of replacing Rudolf Bing, who served in the post for 22 years, fell to a distinguished and delightful Swede named Göran Gentile. And as most everybody knows, Mr. Gentile was killed 18 days into office. So I was the understudy. I was the cover artist, and I became acting general manager for one season and general manager for 2 others. It was almost inevitable that the foreseen economic difficulties were going to burst in the 70s, and they happened to burst while I was there. Now, the position was declared obsolete because in the minds of the then executive committee and president of the Metropolitan, the complications of a large company were too much for one man to run. And the thought was that the Met better be restructured along modern corporate lines.
Is it now thought of the same way as a multinational company?
I think so. I think that was the theory behind the business of structuring it this way. In the long run, that's not going to work. It's not going to work because a theater is not a conglomerate. A theater is people. It is a question of talent and the use of talent. It is a question of how these artists are given their best opportunities to shine on the stage, which in turn brings in the audience that is the bulk of the reason for your being there.
Are you suggesting that the brighter days that the Met is seeing now, certainly brighter fiscally, are about to be beclouded, if I'm not pressing that?
No. I think that there's no question about the fact that the Met has responded, particularly in the last year, to the need for some rethinking and restructuring within the framework of its Board of Trustees. The new president of the Met Board is an extraordinarily able man named Frank Taplin, who has taken on the task of the general financial thrust for the organization. The fact that the papers have recently said the Met has turned a corner is really not quite as black and white as those attractive headlines would indicate.
Does it still have its same low endowment? That was something like a $3 to $4 million figure, as I recall.
The thing is that the Met has to raise $13 million a year for the next 3 years to remain a going entity. I think that the general manager's position, at least the position of an impresario within the organization, will at some point have to be reconsidered, because, in my opinion, I think you've got to have, particularly in an opera house. See, an opera house is by its own nature insane. I mean, you have not only a full orchestra and a chorus and the ballet company and comprimario singers. Those are the singers that sing the secondary parts and the ones that really make an ensemble, and the stars and the ballet.
How many people does it take to put an opera on? I once read something like 700.
Well, it does about that,
really?
And at least at the Metropolitan. But I think the key thing is that there seems to be, from the standpoint of the Board of Trustees, a new determination, less bickering and more positive movement toward getting on with the solutions to the financial problems. Financial problems are always going to be there. I mean, it's part and parcel of our life these days. Every arts institution, it doesn't make any difference where or what.
But of all the performing arts institutions, opera has the highest cost per minute.
Oh, certainly.
What?
Certainly.
If every seat were sold for every performance during the course of a season at the Metropolitan Opera House, would there still be a deficit?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You could not price the seats high enough to cover the deficit. If you did that, you'd be charging $75 and $80 a seat, and of course, I mean, that's just not the cards. So now, there'll always be a deficit, and it's the kind of thing that will have to be faced by people in terms of their abilities, both in the private and public sector, to support. I think some basic decisions have to be made, some priorities. How important to the United States is an organization like the Metropolitan Opera? In my view, it is enormously important. It is the only performing arts organization that has a national constituency. You have over 40 years of uninterrupted Saturday afternoon broadcasts. You have a couple of generations that have been brought up to opera by way of those broadcasts. And you have the fact that the Met has spawned other opera companies in this country, has been the mother lode, as it were. And there's no question in my mind that it is a great organization and a great company. And there is also no question in my mind that this requires special attention from the private sector, special attention from the public sector.
You make a very eloquent and passionate case for opera, as one would expect you to,
I happen to feel it very strongly.
I believe that, and it's quite evident. Let's state for a moment a point of view that is contrary to yours, that is sometimes expressed. And that is, like most Americans, that opera is an immigrant. And the fundamental question, which is in a sense a larger philosophical question raging in art circles today, not restricted to opera, is how many people actually have access to the opera. The reality is that less than 1% of Americans do attend the opera. The question that I'm asking, and one that is being asked really in almost every art form, but perhaps none more relevant than in opera, is if opera is not generally common knowledge, the question has been asked, and I am asking it again, should the bill for it be a common responsibility?
Well, you've got a lot in that question. Let's take it apart a little bit. Yes, 1% of the population of the United States are probably an accurate figure in terms of people who are interested in opera. To make any real sense out of that, you also have to look at what percentage of the population responds to a symphony orchestra, a chamber music, goes to museums, generally participates in the cultural life, reads, among other things, in the cultural experiences that are available to us. And you have to then make a decision as to what is important in contemporary society. Are these activities of the mind and the heart important to us? Well, I think they are. Now, on the top end of the cost scale, there's no question that the opera, live performances of grand opera, unfortunately takes the door prize. And it isn't going to get any cheaper. The elements that go into making an opera production simply cost a lot of money. Interestingly enough, the costs of the major companies in this country, New York, the Met, Chicago Lyric Opera, and the San Francisco Opera, are all about the same. So you're not talking about the Metropolitan as an organization being way out of line in terms of its costs. I believe that the fact that it appeals to 1% of the people is of enormous importance, because that 1% of the people are people who care, are people who have a curiosity, they have an interest, they have a passion, and they are entitled to the best. We are in danger over and over again, every day of our lives, not only in America but all over the world, of drifting into a faceless, plastic society where everything is homogenized, where we find, because living standards are better, that rather than raising the top up, what we're doing is simply pulling the top down. We're not, if we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves, all of us, accepting mediocrity as a way of life. The opera, the museums, the orchestras, the performing arts require excellence. And that percentage of the population that responds to them responds to excellence. That now maligned word, elite, which gets kicked around from pillar to post. Have you ever looked up what the word elite means? Elite means the best for the many.
So that we're now talking about excellence and access.
We certainly are.
And
now access, let me talk about that a second, because actually
I would like to, though, help you support your view, and that is, of that 1%, we're talking of 1% of 200 plus million persons.
Exactly, that's a lot of people.
But one of the surprising figures, and one of the new arguments that I have been following, is the cost of more than 53 sports complexes that have been built in 53 cities in the last number of years, most of whom must rely upon the taxpayer in order to survive. The point of most of these surveys reveal that in at least 10 major cities, including Houston, more people go to the opera than go to football.
Yes, those are very encouraging statistics. Applies also to symphony orchestras. I think there's room for both. I think that
the point is that it's not
mark.
either or.
No, it's not either or. It's
but
a
we'd
mark
better have
of
more excellence in football after what we've seen lately.
Yes. I think that's a well-taken point. But I do feel that we have to be very careful to establish now the priorities in our future. And the continued support of the arts from the federal sector and from states and from the individual cities. Of course, let's be candid about it. The arts get supported because they are developing power, because the individual organizations spin off in terms of service activities, hotels, restaurants, parking lots, urban redevelopment, Lincoln Center, for example. The advent of Lincoln Center on the New York scene in a disgraceful area of the city has added $40 million to the city's tax rolls.
In fact, let's take a moment and talk about the advent of the Lincoln Centers and the Kennedy Centers, often referred to as sterile citadels.
Oh, yes, I know, and edifice complexes and all that kind of stuff.
What has Lincoln Center meant to the arts in general and to New York City specifically?
Well, I think the Lincoln Center has been a tremendous force for good and for excitement in the city. That is not to say that there weren't some powerful mistakes made in the construction of Lincoln Center, and there were.
What are the most significant? Well,
of course, the fact that Avery Fisher Hall had to be rebuilt 3 times is one thing that one doesn't even need to comment on, and thank God Avery Fisher was around to see that it was rebuilt properly. I'm thinking of something very utilitarian. It costs a lot of money to operate those buildings because, among other things, the buildings all share a central mechanical plant that supplies chilled water for air conditioning and heat and all that kind of thing. Those are not at all what you consider something, what one considers attached to the arts. But when I tell you that one day or 2 days after I became acting general manager of the Metropolitan, I was presented by the financial director with a chart that showed what it cost to run that building. This was in 1972. When I left in 1975, the charges had gone from $2.5 million in 72 to $3.1 million, and that was for heat, light, air conditioning, maintenance, and security. It has nothing to do with the people and nothing to do with performances. Anyway, you asked about Lincoln Center. I think it's terrific. I think it has done a major thing for the city. The Kennedy Center in Washington is a perfect example of a building that came into being around an idea that everybody almost uniformly scoffed at. Washington doesn't have a drifting population, nobody has any feeling of spirit, the culture won't be supported, etc. They're all wrong. Kennedy Center has been an enormous catalytic agent.
Galvanizing, yes.
Out in California, the Music Center out there has done the same thing. And in California, in downtown Los Angeles, again a blighted area has been brought to life.
Houston can't be far behind.
No, and the building of these things, of course, does bring out at times the feeling of monuments and the feeling of money being poured into concrete without much thought as to what is going on. And those sins have been committed and will continue to be committed because we are human beings and we have a whole mixture of pluses and minuses. But I don't think those things are basically important. These centers have served and continue to serve the public now and will continue to do so over the next decade, over the decade after that. I am an optimist, and in this book, in trying to write about the glory of music and the theater and the things that we are privileged to participate in because there are talented people around to give us that pleasure. I refuse to don the long stroking beard and say, it's all terrible because it's rubbish. The fact of the matter is that there is no greater satisfaction for anybody than being touched by the arts, than being moved, whether it is in humor and joy or reflective thinking or sadness, whatever. The arts bring out the best in us. I put a little piece in the end of that book because all my life, but for the last 25 years, 30 years, I have been impressed by a sentence that I read on the side of an arts building at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. An extraordinary woman, Sister Mary Madaleva. I used to be a concert agent, and one of my clients was St. Mary's College. And the sister who ran the college was a charming, bright writer herself. And I watched over 2-3 years the building of this art center. The church didn't like it and wouldn't finance it. The college alumni were against it. I think she had pressure groups from the trustees. Everything was against it. But she was determined that she was going to build a building which could serve the students as a center for painting, as a theater, as a music hall. And she went ahead and did it. And as the building neared completion, I was wandering around it with her one very damp, very gloomy February afternoon. And in Indiana, when it's damp and gloomy, it is damp and it is gloomy. And we were wandering through the building, and we came out the front entrance, and as we went down a temporary wooden ramp to get to the ground, my eye fell on the cornerstone. And on the cornerstone of that building was a sentence, and it said, "Art is the signature of man." And I looked at that and I thought, yay, but that's right. That is right.
Why don't you tell us about the woman who got you into this in the first place? How did you ever become an impresario?
I became an impresario because I was fortunate when I was very young to run up against probably the greatest teacher of composition alive today. She is in her 90s and still teaches in Paris and in Fontainebleau in the summertime, and her name is Nadia Boulanger. And she was a refugee from France in 1940. After the fall of France, came to Cambridge, and I was at the Langy School of Music, struggling to become a pianist, but what I really wanted to be was a composer. And somehow or other, I was put in a position of having my student works examined by Nadia Boulanger, who was then and still is a woman of no nonsense. She's a glorious teacher and recognizes talent and develops it and does wonderful things with it, but she will not suffer fools gladly. And when she looked at what I had been doing, I said something rather deferentially about the fact that I really didn't think I had any talent, and she snapped the exercise book closed and said, "You are right. You do not have any talent." And it was she who pointed out that there's a whole other life in terms of the arts, that behind the scenes. And she spoke about how all managers were bad, the usual kind of thing that I've heard many times from many different people. But she gave me the spark to realize that I could be happy doing managerial or impresarioing work without perhaps the actual creative talent. And that's what got me started.
Well, your life in the arts has touched and been touched by many people, some of the most distinguished and some of the most self-obsessed artists of any age. Can you tell us about some of them? Why don't I just tick off some names, and why don't you tell us some stories? Stravinsky.
Well, now you talk about perhaps the most important composer of the 20th century. An extraordinary man, a man of talent, obviously, but an enormously cultivated, cultured man, well-read, in love with painting, someone who had a sense of life in its most active forms. Unfortunately, Stravinsky's three most popular works, Petrushka, Firebird, and Sacre de Printemps, were written on commission from Serge Diaghilev's Ballet Russe and were copyrighted in Imperial Russia and in France, neither of which countries recognized international copyright at that time, because Imperial Russia disappeared, and when that disappeared, also all rights disappeared with it. France was late in joining the international copyright protocol.
Back to St. Mary's.
Back to St. Mary's, exactly. So he never received appropriate royalties for these three works. Of course, they are played and played and played. And when he came to America, his friend Albert Spaulding, the violinist, made reorchestrations with some minor changes, some major changes that Stravinsky wanted to do, but nobody would use them because they had the non-copyright material available. So, of course, he was very, very fussy about money. And any time one had to discuss that subject with him, one had to be prepared to be told in several different versions what had happened with Russia, France, Diaghilev, and those three
You make
pieces.
some very interesting and often amusing references to that in your book.
Well, I also spoke about Stravinsky's birthday party, which was given at the White House in the Kennedy administration. I think it was actually his 80th birthday. 75th birthday. And
you called him soon after that event.
I called him soon after that event because, frankly, I was very disappointed not to have been asked myself. My late and beloved boss, Goddard Lieberson, was, of course, there. And I called him and I asked him how it was the next morning. He said, "Wonderful. But, from music, he did not even know Firebird." So I felt that was a little much. But he was a fascinating man.
How about Beverly Sills?
Oh, well, because she is fantastic. I had the privilege of arranging for her Met debut. And she represents something quite special. Not only is she a glorious singer and a fine actress and a superb artist, she has the enthusiasm, the belief, the passion about what she does that she is able to translate to people.
Rudolph Bing.
I am a great admirer of Mr. Bing's. Mr. Bing did a great deal for the Metropolitan Opera, 22 years as general manager. I've always found Mr. Bing to be somebody that I have enjoyed talking to. He's a very witty and a very urbane man. He was always extremely courteous to me. I cannot say, as I suppose you were expecting me to say, something on the negative side.
I would never count on you for the predictable.
Mr. Bing is a man who ran the Metropolitan the way that he felt it should be run, and he stamped his personality on those years, as did Edward Johnson before him and Giulio Gatti Casazza before that.
Leonard Bernstein. We have about 3 minutes left, and I must ask you about Columbia as well.
Leonard Bernstein is, again, one of the glories of our talent in this country, and also a man that is able to share his enthusiasms and beliefs with other people. He invites participation in his interests, and that's a terrific asset.
Well, now that you've gone into the Academy as Dean of Columbia's School of the Arts, what do you hope to do there?
Well, I hope that Columbia can create a School of the Arts that is the best in the country. And fortunately for the possibility of accomplishing that, we are in New York. And New York is the arts capital of the world. And Columbia put together a School of the Arts in 1965, taking from various other parts of the university those subjects that were dealing with really what could be a graduate school for training. And we cope with the film and theater and composition and writing and painting and sculpture. And I think that given a good break and given the opportunity to take advantage of our city, that the school, which is good, is going to be a lot better. My fascination with it is, having never gone to college myself, or even graduated from high school, and I had an amusing moment with
our most early successful dropout.
I don't know about that, but I do know that the president of Columbia, William McGill, was very matter-of-fact when I told him that it was a nice offer and I was glad to take a crack at it. It's a different world for me. But I said I never went to college, and he didn't seem to mind that. And that is one of the glorious things about Columbia, because in the professional schools, in the graduate schools, they care about trying to get the best people available to do the work that will hopefully set off those extraordinarily bright and talented youngsters that are up there.
Such a remarkable career for a man so young. What do you expect to do for the next 20 years of your life?
I hope to be able to continue to keep my fingers in a lot of different pies.
What are you doing with Sarah Caldwell and her remarkable
Well,
company?
she's a remarkable woman, and Boston, they're a very interesting, crucial point there, because the fact is that Sarah has never had an adequate place to play. And I've been invited to consult with them about a new theater and about several other organizational steps necessary to ensure the fact that the Opera Company of Boston will be around for many years. You know what a consultant is, of course. A consultant is somebody from out of town who's asked their advice, and then the advice is ignored, but not so.
Well, none of your words in musical chairs, A Life in the Arts, will be ignored. Long to be remembered and cherished. It's a pleasure to have you, impresario, arts manager, and now educator and author, Schuyler Chapin. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and thank you, audience, for being with us, too.